I really, honestly, I don't remember. This is the third Yartziet or the second Yartziet. I forgot to look at I think
Second
it's,
Yartziet.
it is a second?
Yeah, I think it's.
I think it's a second.
First would have been after her first.
Right,
12.
right. So I guess it's the second Yartziet of my mom. And I'm gonna, the Parsha preceding the Yartziet, this past Shabbos was Parshas Lecha. And I'm going to speak about something in Parshas Lecha. First of all, because I already had something, I didn't have to prepare anything new. And second of all, Lech Lecha really, it describes my mother, as Yael pointed out earlier. We grew up in a little town in Iowa. My mother grew up in St. Louis. My mother came to St. Louis as a 3-year-old from Russia. And so my mother really grew up in St. Louis. And when she went to Marshalltown, even though many of her relatives were there, it was a tiny little nothing of a town. And many of her relatives had settled there. That's how she met my dad. Her aunt was married to my dad's uncle. Anyway, my mother had culture shock, entering into Marshalltown, Iowa. And my dad's uncle, who was her uncle through marriage, gave her a list of relatives she was not supposed to ever associate with because they were all in the junk business. They were all fighting with each other. So certain relatives were off limits. She was not to be seen in their houses or speaking with them, and so on and so forth. So my mother, from I think the day she moved in, it was really an Indian of Lech Lecha. She wanted to get out of there, and she kept, telling my dad, "We got to leave. We got to leave. We got to leave." Finally, when we reached, bar mitzvah age, my sister was, I guess, about 16 at the time. So she went to Chicago, and my brother and I went to yeshiva in Chicago also, and my parents ended up finally moving out. So, it was a whole different thing for my father because he'd grown up in Marshalltown or near Marshalltown. So for him, it was like a culture shock, the opposite, to come to St. Louis. But my mother consistently wanted to go, always was, one year she got up and left, and we were in St. Louis for 1 year. And then she decided, well, my dad didn't want to move, so we ended up going back to Marshalltown. So Lech Lecha is really a perfect parsha for her because it was a constant idea on her mind to get out of, this little town. And they actually wrote a newspaper article about her in one of the Jewish newspapers about how, she left this little city so her kids could get, an education and everything else. It was very interesting. So that's the Parsha of Lech Lecha. Now, what I'm going to speak about is the Indian of Bris Milah, one of the halachas that we have. And I'm just going to say over a short, more or less a philosophical idea, which, as I mentioned, I had it prepared because I sent it over at my grandson's bris. So I remember at least most of what I said. So I haven't. What I want to focus on is, and it's really a Kabbalistic idea, and that is why the importance of the 8th day for Bris Milah. What is the 8th day? Now, even though normally we have a rule, we don't try to darshan taimei dekra, we don't try to give reasons behind the Torah, but many of the Rishonim, the Rambam and the Mor Nevuchim and others, and of course the Sefer HaChinuch is consistently giving reasons behind the mitzvahs. So we can, if it helps us understand the mitzvah, then it's fine if we want to suggest a reason. So what I want to do is suggest the idea, the significance of the 8th day for Bris Milah. Now, it's interesting because the concept of bris, the word bris is basically, it's an agreement. It's, in other words, a covenant means an agreement between two parties. And when you have an agreement between two parties, each party brings something to the table. Each party has something that they're bringing to the table. And the question is, what is the bris? When Hashem says he's going to make a bris, a covenant, an agreement with Avram Avinu, what is Hashem Kaviyachol bringing to the table? And what is Avram Avinu bringing to the table? What is the agreement between them? Now, in regard to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so he tells Avram, Hakimosi as brisi, he says, I will, keep the bris, I will establish this covenant between me and you and your children, lebris olam forever, Lios lecha le'elokim, that I will be your God, u'lezarecha acharecha, and your progeny's God. I will be the God of you and your future generations. Now Hashem, Avraham had already accepted. Hashem was his God. What is this promise that Hashem saying, I will be your God? What is the idea behind that? So the Bali Kabbalah point out, and it's a Davar Yodua in the Bali Kabbalah, that the symbolism of 8, it always symbolizes Lamala min hateva, something that's supernatural, over and above the laws of nature. The laws of nature, we have a 7-day week, which is the norm. The 8th is always over and above the laws of nature. Jews, what Hashem was telling Avram is, I will be your God. In other words, what I will do for you will be over and above nature. The rest of the world deals with the laws of nature, but as far as you and the Jewish people go, I'm making a covenant that you will be treated lamala min hateva. You'll be treated over and above the laws of nature. Now, the other place where we have bris milah, the next place, is by Yitzis Mitzrayim. Before they brought the Korban Pesach and they put the blood on the doorpost, what happened? We had the Makos Bechoros, and we had later Matan Torah. We had Lamala min hateva. We were involved with Lamala min hateva. The 8th day, for example, 2 other examples of the 8th being Lamala min hateva, is on the holiday of Sukkot. So you have the first 7 days, so 70 korbanos were brought, and they were brought for the Umas Olam. The 8th day, which is Shmini Atzeres, that was only for the Jewish people. Hashem said, this is only for you. It's between me and you, because the 8th is Lamala min hateva. The others, nations, so they have the 7, they're with Teva, and we bring korbanos on their behalf. But the 8th day is dedicated just for the Jewish people, because the relationship between the Jews and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Lamala min hateva. What is an example of par excellence of this is Hanukkah. The holiday of Hanukkah is the holiday par excellence of Lamala min hateva, that the oil lasted 8 days, and that's 8 again, is a symbol of Lamala min hateva. So what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Kaviyachol bringing to the table is saying, do the bris milah, make this covenant, and I will be your God, and I will treat you Lamala min hateva. What is the exact thing that happens right after the bris milah? What is Abraham told? That you're going to have a child. What was the problem? Sarah was too old to have children. As far as Teva goes, there was no ability for her to have a child. Once Hashem made the bris with Abraham Avinu, that he could treat him Lamala min hateva, then the next thing will be, now you can have a child, even though it's Lamala min hateva, and you couldn't, on the basis of Teva, on the basis of natural phenomena, you can't have a child, but on a basis of Lamala min hateva, how HaKadosh Baruch Hu treats Avram, yes, you will be able to have a child, and that's what transpires after the bris milah. What did Avram have to bring to the table? So it says in the preamble to the bris, so it says that that Hashem said to Avram, Vayi Avram ben Tishim Shana v'Teisha Shana, he was 99. Hashem appeared to him. He says, his halech lefanai, go before me, v'ayei tamim, and be tamim. What does tamim mean? Tamim means perfect. So what does it mean to be perfect? So Rashi brings down, Rashi says that first he brings down doing mitzvahs, etc. But then he brings down a medrash from Bereshis Rabbah. So he says, v'haya tamim, you should be perfect. Achshav chaser, right now you're lacking something. Wait 1 second, I'm sorry, that's not the, here. Shekolzman, here's what Rashi brings, I don't know, it's also from Bereshis Rabbah. So it's halech lefanei, okay, but, so he says, go with mitzvahs, and that you will be perfect, meaning, shekolzman sha'ar arla b'cha, as long as you have the orla, you're not circumcised, so you're considered a balmum lefanai. You're considered in front of me like a balmum. So v'haya tamim means when you do the bris milah, you will be perfected. You will perfect yourself. So the idea of haya tamim basically means that Avram is bringing to the table the concept of perfecting the world, perfecting himself. What we know, basically is Tikun Olam, perfecting himself and the world. That's what he has to bring to the table. Now, there are two midrashim. I think I heard them both from Rabban Soloveitchik al Shalom. There are two midrashim that bring this idea home. And before I mention the midrash, it's actually I want to read it inside that the Sefer Achinu says that Ha'am HaNivchar, the reason the Jews have to have a bris is because the chosen nation, Hashem wants them lahashli tzuchunaso, to complete themselves, to perfect themselves. Ratziliot hashlam al yedei Adam, and man must do the perfecting of himself. Not that a Kadosh Baruch Hu, man is not born, circumcised most of the time. It happens once in a while, but most of the time he has to do it himself. Below barash alim mibeten, he's not created perfect out of the, coming out of the womb perfect. L'ramez elav kikasher, so tashlum tzuris gufo al yado, just like man has to perfect himself, then Hashem kach biyado, also it's in his power, lashlim tzuris nafsho, to perfect himself spiritually. So that's a task of man, to perfect himself physically and spiritually. So the two medrashim, very interesting medrashim. So one medrash is a medrash in Bereshis Rabbati, and it says that they were asked, one of the Chachamim asked, was man created, Adam Arisha, was he created with a bris milah, without a bris milah? He said, look, there's a problem. If he's created without a bris milah, which is the norm, so what are you doing a bris milah? You're tampering with the work of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You shouldn't be doing it. And if he was born without, then, but we're born with. So what did the Bria change? What's going on? So he was answered, no. He said the ikar is that, it could be Adam Arishon was born in a perfect state, but man is born in an imperfect state. And the British brings down the pasuk that it says, Bereshis Asher Ba'alukim en ksiv, kan elalasos. We say Asher Ba'alukim lasos. Well, you say that Hashem rested on the seventh day, Mikal Malachto, Asher Ba'alukim la'asos, which God created to do. What is to do? It should just say God rested from what he created. Asher bara. What does it mean? Asher bara Elokim la'asos. So the Medrash says, because, in other words, did God create cakes? Did God create, foods? What God created is wheat, and man has to create cake. So what it means is, Asher Elokim lasos, the world is created in an imperfect state, and God created it la'asos, to be finished by man, that man should perfect it. So the idea is that we're born with the Orla. Why? In order that we perfect it, because that's our job, is Asher Elokim lasos, for us to perfect it. Now, the same idea is brought in the Tanchuma, a very interesting story between Tanis Rupas of Russia, who was a Roman, governor or whatever, who was in the time of Rabbi Kiva, and he asked Rabbi Kiva, what's greater, Maisa Adam or Maisa Elokim, the work of man or the work of God? What he wanted to do was trick Rabbi Kiva, because he thought Rabbi Kiva will say the work of God is greater than the work of man, and then Tanis Rupas would have said, so man is created without a bris milah. That's how God created him. If the creation of God is better and perfect, I'm going to aser bris milah. Nobody can have a bris milah because that's the will of God. So Rabbi Kiva was a smart person, and he told Tanis Rupas, give me a day and I'll answer you tomorrow. So he went home, he had his wife cook all kinds of cakes and babkas and whatever, and he comes to Tanis Rupas the next day, and he brings this raw wheat and raw grain, and he brings the cakes. He said, here, taste, what do you want to eat? He said, well, I can't eat the flour, the raw grain. You can't eat that. He said, that's Maisa Elokim. He said, but what do you want to eat? The cakes. Those are Maisa Adam. So he brought home the idea that God created the world in an imperfect state in order, in other words, that man should perfect himself. That's what it means that Hashem told Abraham, Hayatamim, you should become perfect, meaning now I'm going to give you bris milah. What you have to bring to the table is the agreement to perfect the world, to perfect it. Now let me ask you, when does man's job of perfecting the world begin? So God created the world in 6 days. The seventh day he rested. When do we start with our work? The eighth day. The eighth day. In other words, after the 7 days, on the eighth day, we start to perfect the world. So bris milah, we can understand now why it's on the eighth day. Because the bris is a covenant between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and man. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I will treat you lamala min hateva, which is symbolic of the eighth day, and you will in turn do the perfection of the world, which is symbolic of the eighth day. So it works both ways. That's why I think the bris was to be given on the, why we do the bris on the eighth day. I mentioned two of the midrashim that brought home the idea that man's job in this world, and the bris milah is symbolic of that. Tamim, you should be perfect. That the bris milah is symbolic of man's job to perfect the world. And I mentioned that the world was created with the 6 days. The seventh day Hashem rested, and the eighth day man begins his job of perfecting the world. And that's why the milah is on the eighth day, because it's symbolic of our obligation to start perfecting the world. So the only thing I wanted to add about Tikun Olam, this concept of perfecting the world, because it's become a very popular catchphrase. Everybody talks about Tikun Olam, not only amongst Jews, even amongst non-Jews. Everybody takes from Judaism, Tikun Olam. And the truth of the matter is, there's one element of Tikun Olam that's overlooked, and that is that when we think of Tikun Olam, we usually think of it vis-a-vis the society at large. And we usually think of it in two areas. We think of it, that the idea of perfecting the society on a physical sense, in other words, scientific and technological advancements, curing disease, doing things that have to make the world a better place technologically and physically. And then the other thing we think of is the idea of bringing morality and, things to the world that are advancements in that state. But they're all always thought about vis-a-vis the world at large and the society, and how can we improve society. That's what we think Tikkun Olam is. However, there's a major point, and I think that is really what the Chinuch was getting at, because the Chinuch said over there that the Bris Milah is also symbolic of being masaking yourself, also your spiritual tikkun. So the truth of the matter is, every individual is an olam, is a world in and of themselves. Everybody is their own, so to speak, their own world. So when we talk about tikkun olam, it's not only the idea of fixing up the world at large, but there's also tikkun olam on the individual person, because he's got his world that requires tikkun olam. That's the other thing that the Bris Milah symbolizes, not only a tikkun olam vis-a-vis the outside world, but vis-a-vis the inner world, the mitzvahs. Rashi says on the pasuk, his halech lefanai v'etamim. That's the preamble to the Bris Milah. And his halech lefanai, Rashi quotes the Targum that says, serve me, serve Hashem. So by doing that, heyetamim, you will be perfect, which means, in other words, every time a person does a mitzvah, they wear a pair of tefillin, they keep kosher. Every time a person performs a mitzvah, he's basically involved in tikkun olam, in his own olam, with his own world. So that is the point that I wanted to add, because people misconceive the idea of tikkun olam and think that it's specifically vis-a-vis the society, and forget that there is an inyan of tikkun olam vis-a-vis the individual also. And I think that that's probably what the Chinuch had in mind when he mentioned that.